Afternoon. So this afternoon, I'm joined by Jon Lombardo, who's very kindly given up some time to chat about, career to date, but specifically about Evidenza. So, Jon, thank you very much for doing that.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
Excellent. So, very, very brief snapshot, because obviously you'll give a bit more insight for anyone who will be listening or watching who may not be familiar with your work. Though I'd be surprised if there is anyone. But so you're co-founder of Evidenza, and you'll explain more about that. But fundamentally, it's a business that's pioneering, if I've understood correctly, the application of using synthetic research and then sharing that for the benefit of marketing and sales. And prior to that, so you work with LinkedIn. So you're head of research for their B2B Institute, and also headed up the social media center of excellence for GE as well. So really interesting kind of in the background there. And if you don't mind, let's just sort of dive straight in. Would you mind awfully giving a sort of potted history, if you like, of your career journey to date? So what's led you to where you are now?
Yeah, I would say it probably starts with a concept most people, I believe, will be familiar with, which is Moneyball. I grew up in an area in the United States in the Northeast, in Connecticut, actually, which is between two of the great baseball teams, the Red Sox and the Yankees.
Yeah.
And I grew up, most of my family were Yankee fans. My father was a Red Sox fan. I was a big baseball fan and still am a big baseball fan. And in particular, I became obsessed with the idea of Moneyball. So I have tried to find what I would say are Moneyball ideas throughout my career. I actually started my career in China because I thought China would be a big economic opportunity. It is a big economic opportunity, just not for people who aren't Chinese for the most part. So I started in China. That was kind of the Moneyball approach. I was in politics for a short period. That was about the time when, Obama was running in 2010. They were saying spend 10% of your money on, Google in 2010. So 10% in 2010. And that was where digital became, and social media became, obviously, like after Obama in 08 and into 2010, became the big way that traditional politics was changing with digital or social politics. And so kind of it was China to social media, let's call it. And that's how I got to GE. GE was setting up for social media, presence, and then was running the social media center of excellence there, figuring out how it worked, not just at the corporate level, but in the business units, because obviously it's very different how the businesses think about digital marketing than how corporate thinks about business marketing or digital marketing. So there was kind of like, China, there was politics, there was GE, and that led me to LinkedIn. Obviously, like if you can help GE set up both kind of corporate and business level, social media and try to drive revenue with it, then that's a place that would lead you to LinkedIn, where it's all about how do you kind of think about the business of marketing, through the lens of social media. And then ultimately, I got to AI, which is kind of the next wave, So I think it's important to figure out where you think the paradigm shift is, because whereas a paradigm shift, generally it means there will be a change in guard and there will be an opportunity for you.
Yes, how very true. And did that then lead you on to create Evidenza? Did you spot that shift and go, now's the moment? You had this idea and it was the right time?
Yeah, I mean, you can always tell a retroactive story that makes you sound smarter and more strategic than you
How true.
actually were. So the very polished version of the story would be something like, Bezos has this kind of anecdote, which I have read. He was working a very high-paying hedge fund job in New York City at a place called D.E. Shaw, which is still one of the five, most profitable, most shrewd hedge funds in the world. So he left a multi-million, tens of $1 million a year job to go start Amazon. And his core insight was, the internet's growing at 3,400% a year. You don't see stuff like that. I thought that was worth taking, kind of a risk. And I would say in our case, it would be a similar thing. Obviously we could have stayed at LinkedIn. LinkedIn's a great brand, has great customers, very stable business, but AI was clearly a bet worth making. It's ended up probably being even bigger than we thought it was going to be, and we've benefited from that tailwind. But clearly there were sparks of genius, of intelligence, of opportunity there, and we felt, even in some of our early testing, like we had seen certain sets of data and we could compare it to the AI data, and we saw that they were, without question, even in a crude form, similar enough that it was worth making a bet on. So yeah, I would say that's kind of that's the polished story. The less polished story is something more like, like maybe at LinkedIn, we'd had some level of success, but it becomes successively harder to find the next opportunity because there's always a lot of people and there's fewer and fewer jobs as you go up. And so maybe there was a chance to be successful there, but the truth is I was never going to be the CMO of LinkedIn. That was just never going to happen. And so in that kind of world where you think you have an idea and you think maybe your opportunity is capped at a big company, which it often is for good reasons, then you say, well, I want to go take this other chance and I don't know if it will work or not. So there's some combination of opportunity and opportunism, let's call it.
And how would you describe Evidenza? How would you describe what it is that you're doing? And, would you be able to share some of the pioneering work that you're doing? Because it's kind of cutting edge in terms of the AI technology you're using. But how would you describe sort of what it is that you're doing for your clients?
Yeah, I think part of spotting opportunities is just pattern matching, to be really simple about it. And at LinkedIn, we saw that there was this need for marketing effectiveness in a B2B context. There's lots of literature and lots of experts on marketing effectiveness in a consumer world. I mean, this goes back to soap operas. So it's a long running tradition of let's look at the sales data, let's look at the marketing activities, and let's look at kind of, what is driving, what are the different kinds of tactics and strategies that are driving the right kind of financial outcomes in B2C marketing. That, for all intents and purposes, doesn't exist or didn't exist in B2B. So at LinkedIn, we had the idea, why don't we just take these core ideas we know from B2C, which are maybe, at least in our small world, most famously, kind of expressed by Ehrenberg Bass thinking, the laws of growth. Can we just take those ideas and try to replicate them for B2B and simply see what holds and what doesn't? And in fact, that simple idea provided a lot of learning for people in B2B. I mean, it's amazing how many people come to me and say like, hey, like, that's amazing that you guys did that. Thank you so much. Like, I couldn't take the serial study to my, my Boston financial services or my Boston professional services, my Boston manufacturing or aerospace or pharma, whatever it is, they wouldn't take us seriously. But when LinkedIn is talking about it, when it's B2B, that makes more sense. So honestly, that was the first pattern that we saw, was simply, there's this great body of literature in consumer. Can we bring that to B2B? And then once you start doing that work in B2B, you realize there's two huge constraints. It's just super difficult to find people to do the research to inform it, and it's super slow. So in many cases on finding people, if you can find them, incredibly expensive, and you often can't find them at all. So that's just one of the constraints. And then the truth is, because it's so hard or so impossible, it just takes a really long time. So it's super slow and super expensive. And so for the most part, people don't really do market research in B2B, honestly. They do it, but they do it with tiny samples, or they don't do it at all if they're, if they can't, obviously. And so there you start to think there are these constraints, how are we going to solve for these constraints? And then you say, well, actually AI might be able to solve for these constraints. So one of the things that synthetic data does is companies always have a very small set of data, either that they sit on or that maybe they can kind of, garner through market research. But there's this wonderful phrase in AI, which I love, which is all data is more valuable than your data. And synthetic research allows you now to model different segments and figure out who you should target and what should you say to them and how will they respond to this creative and where are they spending their time online. So you can start to think through, we can do research on all these questions we could never do before. We can then actually use that to inform our segmentation, our targeting, our positioning, core marketing strategy. We can test some messages. We can then figure out where to distribute it. Then we can even model what we think the responsiveness to that kind of marketing plan would be in some form of sales, which we can show to then finance and sales teams to convince them that our marketing plan is rigorous and thoughtful and informed, and they ought to fund our budget. So you can pull all of this together using synthetic data, which is honestly, in some sense, impossible to get all of those data points. Now you can kind of synthesize or generate all of those data points, which is really what synthetic data or generative AI allows you to do for the first time.
And presumably in rapid time, you're explaining there that the kind of the ability to do that research for B2B was ineffectual, hard and slow. But what you've built is a system that enables companies to do that really efficiently.
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways I talk about it, just to make it super, super clear, is nobody would ever do what I'm about to describe. But let's say that you decided, I just want to figure out how many segmentation studies I can do in a year.
Yeah.
So for my business, I'm going to just do as many as I can do in a year. I've been part of segmentation studies at LinkedIn. I've seen lots of companies do them. They take usually a minimum of 3 months. Once you get everybody involved and get all the data and synthesize the data and produce a report, it usually takes 3 months. It could take 6 months. It could take 9 months, honestly. But let's just assume, for simplicity's sake, it takes 3 months. You could do 4 in a year. With our system, you can do 4 in an hour. So, if you think about what that means, you went from having the ability to do 4 in a year, which frankly, nobody would ever do, by the way. That's why companies generally only do a segmentation study every 3-4 years, to now being able to do, I don't know, 1,000 in a year, 1,200 in a year. So this is the way that AI kills constraint. I call it a constraint killer, or because it kills these constraints and allows you to think about things in a totally new way. So now our way of thinking is, you should do 10 segmentations and look at all of them together and then figure out what are the elements you like from all of them. And then that becomes your ultimate segmentation study. So it's a very iterative, flexible, dynamic kind of simulation of what it would be that gets you your final output, versus I do one every 4 years. And I trust it, not because I really trust it. I trust it because it's the only one I have.
So it blows that old way of thinking completely out of the water then, because you're now enabling people to do things in far more efficiently in kind of real time. So because of the work you're doing, are you then, the clients you're working with, presumably you get a really good insight into all of the things they're looking to test. So, what are the kind of common challenges that they're looking to test this theory on? Are you seeing common links between the things that clients are looking to test using this research?
There are some core, I guess, kind of deliverables that everybody's interested in. We primarily are dealing with either B2B companies or very big B2C companies that have a B2B arm. So they're trying to talk to veterinarians or bartenders, or some more difficult or hard to reach population, even though it's in the consumer world. But yeah, generally they have never been able to do a segmentation, so like that's a very core thing that we do, segmentation and targeting. Or a lot of them are very interested in category entry points. I mean, this tends to be more still in I would call it the kind of leading edge or vanguard, but people are very interested in, right now our messaging tends to be about us and our products. Actually, what if it was about the customer and their needs? And so what are the key needs that put customers into the market, category entry points, jobs to be done, however you want to talk about it. That tends to be something that is a very exciting idea to many people. So the segmentation, targeting, and positioning work we do. The other thing that we do, which very few other people do, is we will tell you, these are your core segments. And actually we will say there are 40,000 people in this segment and only 5,000 people in this segment. And here's what we think the average deal size is for the big segments and the smaller segments. And here's the financial value for your biggest segment and your smallest segment. So we'll rank everything by financial value, which is incredibly important, because B2B, you are dealing usually with your sales team or your finance team, but they have quotas, they have business plans. They're always dealing with the math, the numbers. They're not dealing with a lot of what marketing is, which is that of like the text or just the language. So we're kind of, we say fight finance with finance, or we often talk about it in more complex terms as a marketing finance interface. But I would say segmentation, targeting, positioning, but that's the core stuff that is, I think, repeatable. The thing I've been surprised by is the number of questions people have. Once you remove the constraint of, you can almost ask any question you want, people actually have lots of questions they want answered. So it can be stuff like, which of these names is, kind of the best fit across all of our audience? Which of these concepts is most likely to resonate? What's good about the concepts? What's bad about the concepts? What's clear? What's unclear? So we have naming testing, we have concept testing. People obviously want to test very specific and discrete types of creative, whether it be taglines or images or videos. There's a lot of work that we do around value propositions. So, like we have these 3 different value props. Again, like there's a whole set of questions around clarity and confusion. And if you had to explain it to your board and in one sentence, how would you do that? And now among the 3, choose the ones you want. Or even in some cases, take all the stuff that's unclear in this value prop, and actually our system can write you a better one that says it keeps what's clear and it kind of replaces what's unclear with something more clear. And this is where actually the ability to have a large language model, which, they are brilliant parsers of language and brilliant writers as a result. They can actually take something you have and give you a better version, a better tagline, a better value prop, kind of a better, kind of whatever it is that you want. So this is a place where we're exploring, I would say, the frontier of not just what people think they want, but what's possible based on what they're giving us.
So it's a game changer for marketers then who've got access to working with you in the terms that so you're saying they could test all sorts if they're looking to do a rebrand or new creative, new go-to-market proposition, value proposition. That's astonishing. And what are the plans for the business going forward? What do what are your thoughts over the next kind of year or so? How do you plan on growing this going forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. We really are going to be more focused, I would say, on B2B than on B2C because there's just a much bigger pain there. So that has been our focus. I believe that will continue to be our focus. We believe that the market is going to go from being one where you mostly talk to humans to one where you mostly talk to synthetics. So we think it's, B2B is a very interesting place to be. We feel that the market is going to tip over time from being human to synthetic. And this is actually something that you see in lots of different markets. So like going back, you can think of like vanilla started out as an organic product. Now it's primarily synthetic. Rubber is actually more synthetic than organic now. Oil is more synthetic than organic. Diamonds are more synthetic than organic. Insulin is more synthetic than organic. So if you kind of look at how these markets work, they start being organic and then they move to being synthetic because there are advantages to synthetic in a variety of different ways. So we believe that like we'll be in the B2B space, the market will tip to being more synthetic. I think just to touch on the past point, when markets go from being, let's call it organic to synthetic, they get 10 times bigger because there are all these advantages. So in this sense, just people can ask many more questions. There's going to be many more questions that they're going to want to ask. So, we feel that those are just kind of the trends that are going to drive the market. And then we're going to build the different, I guess, tools you would say to help marketers do their job. So, marketers need help doing research. They need help doing segmentation, targeting, positioning. They need to understand creative, understand distribution. They need to be able to put that into a business plan that has financials attached to it, and then they will have all sorts of other questions we can't even imagine. But we're going to build out, I would call it the core marketing plan you would want. Like people could do their taxes, but they use TurboTax to help them produce a tax return.
Yeah.
We are going to help people who could do a marketing plan. We're going to produce a marketing plan for them with all the key elements they want with some of their data in there. And then they'll still make decisions based on that, right? They'll still say, I like this, or I want to change that. And, I want to talk to my sales team, and they'll make changes, but we want to be able to basically be able to put kind of a customer in every pocket. So you can go and talk to your customer on demand, and then a plan, on every desk would be the way to think about it.
That's really exciting. So to enable them, in essence, to just kind of map out all areas of their marketing plan or strategy, and you'll have kind of systems to be able to help them across all of those areas. So they've then got data to make decisions in really rapid time. It's astonishingly powerful. What advice would you give to senior marketers who are kind of starting their journey with AI? Might be considering working with Evidenza, but what advice would you say to me? How do they go about it? We're hearing this all the time at the moment. They recognize this is going to be a really big part of marketing going forward. What advice would you share with them as to how they work with AI?
I would try to figure out the place you want the most leverage, and then I would try to use AI there. So, one of the things we didn't talk about, but AI also reduces risk. But with any new technology, there's lots of risk. And that's often why people are hesitant to adopt the technology, especially in B2B, where I would say most firms are more risk averse or risk avoidant. They will avoid AI. In fact, I think AI makes things less risky, not more risky. And I can explain how. So when we run a segmentation, as I said, we have the ability to run the segmentation, and we can run it with as few as 3 segments or as many as 12 segments. We can run it more on a needs basis, what we call psychographic, or we can run it more on kind of like a role, function, company size, so more firmographic. So almost like B2C, your needs, B2B, like what's your job title, company size, industry, all that. But the reality is you can run, as I said, 4 segmentation in an hour. So you're at less risk of having a result that is a bad result, where I go do 3 months of work and I give it back to you and you say, oh, this isn't exactly what I wanted, So I would, because it's less risky, it means you can find the highest leverage need and try to address that using AI. And I believe that will give you the most opportunity. So that could be, I have research questions I want to answer. That could be, I need a segmentation for either a pre-existing business. Like some people will say, here's a segmentation we did 4 years ago. Here are 6 segments. We can just map to those 6 segments. Or we can say, They can say to us, hey, we're entering a new market. We don't know who the segments are. Can you find a competitor who's already in that market? And we can learn from them how to enter that market, who the key segments are. So I would say whether it's any of the things we talked about, research, segmentation, targeting, positioning, creative, distribution, whatever you want, other questions we haven't imagined, concept testing, naming, value propositions, whatever the highest leverage or most immediate need you have is, try to address it using AI, because you can actually run many simulations. And in my sense, and in my way, that makes it less risky, not more risky. And so if you don't have as much risk, then go for the leverage, because that's where the big opportunity or big result comes from.
Oh, absolutely love that. Jon, thank you very much for going through all of those. Is there anything else that you would like to share?
I guess the final point I would just make for everyone is AI is real. There will be an advantage, in my estimation, to companies that embrace it earlier rather than later. And then the final point I would make is, risk and return are, of course, related, but I talked about this as being a constraint killer. It used to be that you had to choose. People would say, like, there's faster, there's better, and there's cheaper. Choose two, you can't have all three. I actually believe now with AI, you can have faster, better, cheaper, less risky, more private. There's all of these enormous advantages to AI. So it's real, it's exciting. I believe it's going to make people's job better and easier and faster and cheaper and more private, all the things that I'm talking about. So, believe in it, invest in it, figure out some place you want leverage, and then, just go do something. I mean, in most cases, you learn from doing, or action produces information. And so, just get off zero, I guess, would be my final offer to everybody.
Thank you very, very much. We'll share a link to the Evidenza website. Thank you ever so much for taking the time to kind of go through, and very, very best of luck with the future of the business.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate the time.